sellers want to sell their house. So am I wrong on that? Like, am I being, like, in your experience, having done this now 6 or 7 times, would you ever have anybody that goes like, hell no, screw realtors, I'm not going to pay them like, has that happened? No? You talk about it privately, we talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. I'm your host, James Twiggins, along with my co-host, Mr. Crazy Uncle Keith.
Yes, sir. What's up, Twiggy?
Well, you know what? We are just throwing all sorts of controversy out, so we figured we'd do one today as well.
Yes.
Tell us about Chris Cragnotti, who's the broker owner of G&C Properties in Glendale, California, and this really controversial topic we're about to do. So
I mean, it
is and it isn't.
It isn't.
Shouldn't
it
be.
Isn't. But what's cool is Chris decided back in November to implement the change in his business. And so we really are getting like postcards from the front lines of a person who implemented the change months ago. And what it was like to talk to sellers, what it was like to talk to buyers, what it was like to talk to buyers agents, and more. So if you wish that you could talk to someone who had been doing this for months because you just have implemented the change in your business, you are really going to enjoy, well, you might not enjoy the conversation, but you'll find it interesting.
To be clear, the change we're referring to is no offers of compensation on any of his listings, just for context. So
Yes.
You guys can all put it in your ears and listen to this one because he's going to go into gory detail on what he did, what happened, and how it all turned out. So put it in your ears.
Kids, you're going to dig it.
Chris, welcome to the podcast. We
Yes.
are excited to have you on the show, especially
Thanks,
with the timing of what our conversation is going to be about. Also, you are in a far better place than we are. I believe you are in Sicily, if I'm correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was not on the yacht. I was not on the
You were not on the yacht that burned down, thank God. So,
Yes.
but genuinely, thanks for being with us. We're going to give this a shot just for viewers and listeners. As I mentioned, he is the other side of the world, so everything should work if the internets are working correctly. So
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Chris, all right, let's jump in. We got a lot of stuff to talk to you about today, and it's extraordinarily relevant for the lack of drama going on in residential real estate. So first, just real quick, give everybody just a background on you, your company. I think you've been in real estate for about 18 years, how big you guys are, what you operate, just kind of a 2-minute rundown on that.
Okay.
And then we're going to dive into what you're on the show for.
Okay. So my name's Chris Cragnotti. I'm the broker owner of a boutique real estate office based in Glendale, California. It's called G&C Properties. I'm actually a second generation realtor. I was in the very lucky position to inherit a very strong and reputable company that my mom started in 1988. She actually started selling real estate when she was pregnant with me, which was a few years before that. And then she went off on her own in 1988, which back then was actually kind of a big deal.
Right.
And she just worked really hard in our area for years and years. So she retired right around COVID. I took over. We had a couple of agents working with us, great gals. They decided to go do other things. I really valued being just on my own. I much more interested in focusing on my clients' needs and not having to manage people and all of that. So I've just been on my own the last couple of years, which has kind of made what we're going to be talking about really easy to do because
Sure.
I don't have anybody I have to really ask. I can just make the decisions that I need to do. One of the things my mom used to say in interviews was that, working with an independent broker was that, we can right our ship very quickly. We can shift our business model quickly. We can change really quickly. And big companies, they always have a really hard time, those corporate structures. They have a hard time moving and changing. So I didn't really understand what she meant until all of this happened. And I realized,
Until you just had
to.
Until you just had to have a meeting with yourself and make a decision, right?
I mean, obviously with my clients, I'm not doing things
Yeah.
my clients don't agree with, but I'm able to do things that others couldn't necessarily do or didn't think to do. So that's
Keith, you got a follow-up? You always usually have a follow-up, my friend.
No, I really want to dive into to the questions because to set this up, you've been a pioneer well before these settlement changes were required to be changed. You decided to be a pioneer and make these changes as early as November of last year. Now, the beautiful thing about being a pioneer is you get to the ground first. The hard thing about being a pioneer is sometimes they die. So what made you really decide that this was the direction that it was going and it was time to not wait and implement this into your business?
And to be clear, to set this up so everybody understands, you moved away from cooperative compensation starting November of last year, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So give
my
us
first
the
listing
background.
came out in January. But I started signing up listing agreements and pretty much immediately after the settlement, or after the judgment, rather, not the settlement. So look, it really wasn't just one thing. It was sort of the buildup and confluence of many different things. So really quickly, I remember I was reminded by a colleague of mine who works at a different company. She and I were volunteering at the Board of Realtors, our local board. This was probably 2018 or 19. I was the treasurer. She was the president. And you guys will know the dates better than I, but I don't remember the timeline of the first DOJ settlement and when the lawsuits were filed, but they kind of happened sort of around the same time. And I remember sitting in the office with her there one day, and I just looked at her. We were kind of talking about it. I said, they're coming for us. They are coming for us. I don't know when, I don't know how, but they're coming for us. And I had kind of forgotten I had said that until I saw her a couple of months ago. She was like, I remember when you said that they were coming for us. I'm like, oh yeah, I did say that. So it's been brewing in my mind, thinking with all the other big businesses and corporations, all these things that have been put through the ringer the last few years, I thought there was no way we were going to come out of this unscathed. There was just no way. So I've kind of been watching, and James, to your credit, a lot of it, my ultimate decision to do it was seeing you on panels, talking about what the DOJ wanted, reading. I've watched so many videos on this topic. It's insane. I tried to stay very informed on it, and you're one of the many people I've watched about it. And I just knew that it was coming. I knew what the DOJ wanted. The verdict came in. We had no idea what the outcome of that was going to be, but we knew what the DOJ wanted by that point. And to back up even a little bit further, you guys probably know in California, every 6 months, in June and December, the California Association of Realtors updates their forms, introduces new forms. And last June of 23, I was at the big meeting where Gov Hutchinson came down. He was presenting the forms, and he sort of casually pointed out that the RPA was being updated with a new, in anticipation of possibly there being situations where there wasn't cooperative compensation being offered in the MLS. CAR was creating a pathway for buyers to request sellers to pay their agent. And that's ultimately what they did. They created a pathway where one did not exist before. We never really needed it, but even if we had needed it, there was no natural way for it to happen. Buyers would have had to write something in the additional terms, or, there was always the CBC form, but that only works if there's compensation in the MLS for the most part. So anyway, they slipped this change into the RPA, which everyone is aware of now, but not everybody really paid attention to last June when they did it. But they created line 3G3, check this box, and the seller agrees to compensate the buyer's agent per the terms of the attached new form, single page, SPBB seller payment to buyer's broker. So that happened in June, long before the verdict, long before any of that. So then I get a call from, I knew that was there, thought, okay, well, that's interesting. I get a call from someone who wants to list their house in I think it was October, early October. And we met, they're great. They're like, our house isn't going to go on the market till March, but we're ready to sign up. So I sent them a draft of a listing agreement with cooperating compensation in it. That was the conversation we had. I said, now there's some stuff going on. This might change, but for now, this is kind of the way it goes. Partway through the trial, NAR removes the mandate for cooperative compensation. Suddenly, that was an interesting turn of events. I thought, okay, well now, okay, that's interesting. So I had sent that contract to them in October, just a draft. They sat on it. I knew we'd catch up at some point. Didn't really need it till March, but the verdict comes down. And so I sent him an email to follow up and said, hey, you may have been aware of this thing that happened. The way we've written the contract now, we can still use this contract. We can sign it. And then when the property comes out in March, if the dust is settled and we know things have changed a little bit, we can make an adjustment to the section related to buyer's agent compensation. He said, let's talk about it. So he called me. And this was now after the verdict, but before any discussion of settlement or anything. And he said, I like where you're going with that, but let's take it out now. And if we need to put it back in, we can. I said, okay. So I redrew the contract, took it out completely, which was weird because now it's just a blank field on the purchase on the listing agreement. Because of course, Zip Forms doesn't allow you to put a 0 in that field. You just have to leave it blank, which is really weird. I don't like leaving blanks like that. But anyway, I digress. So I signed that one up. Again, that house wasn't coming out until March. So then I got another call from some family friends. Their mother passed. It was time to put the mother's house on the market. I had the same conversation with them. And the conversation was, there's now a pathway, basically what I just described to you. First of all, most of the people I talk to don't understand any of it. They're all, they don't really understand. If they've had experience with selling a house before, they're stuck kind of, that's their reference. So I kind of have to talk them away from that and explain the difference. And honestly, I realized that I had a fiduciary obligation. Forget whether or not I wanted to, or I thought it was cool or whatever. I had an obligation to explain to my sellers that this pathway existed, that they not only do they not have to offer compensation, but this buyer can now ask them in the purchase agreement. They can ask them to pay it. And I explained to every one of my sellers that I've had this conversation with, you're likely going to be asked to pay compensation. And I will tell you that I think paying someone to represent a buyer is a great thing to do. It's a great insurance policy for you. I don't do dual agency. Rarely do I do dual agency, particularly when I've got multiple offers coming in on a property. I don't do dual agency. I don't want other agents to be nervous. I don't want other buyers to feel like there's some potential funny business. I'm in a fortunate position where I don't need to feel like I've got to grind every penny out of every transaction. So I try to avoid dual agency when possible. So I explain to my sellers, you're going to be asked. I think it's a great insurance policy. They should have their own representative. It protects you. It protects me. It's better. And it's worth your money to do it. You'll be asked. You can still say no. You'll be able to negotiate it. We'll cross each of those bridges when they come, but I still think it's a very important thing. So
all right, Chris, let me grab you real quick. Let me grab you real quick because you made a lot of really good points here. So I just want to pin a few of these things in. So you were sitting down explaining these to the sellers. You were giving them the options. Just to kind of reiterate, you were explaining to the seller that unrepresented buyer, risky, not a good idea, likely can't afford to pay their agent. So you need to be open-minded to any of these types of requests. You didn't say one way or the other. You just said, this is some of the things you need to pay attention to. It's your choice. However, be prepared because in most cases, you're going to see this come across in the offer itself. Yes, is that correct?
That was the most important thing. I wanted to make sure they understood that there was I wanted them to understand that there was a very strong chance they were still going to pay a commission. That just because it's not in the listing agreement didn't mean it wasn't going to come their way. And that it was the risk. So there were risks, right? So I started to talk about the one that came up with the family whose mother died. So he said, okay, I understand that there's this process available. What's the risk? And I said, well, I don't think that there's really a risk right now because we're in a really strong market. Remember, this property came out in January. In December, the Fed said they were going to be reducing interest rates 5 times this year. The market went on fire from January to March. It just was crazy. Right. And I was like, so we're doing it. We're taking this risk at a time when I don't think it's going to be a problem because buyers are still crazy and they're still going nuts. I said, but the risk is your house won't get shown and you won't get any offers. And buyers will be too confused to even want to get involved. That is a potential risk. I said, I think it's really small. And I said, we're going to know immediately. The house will come on the market. I will know within a day if that's going to be a problem. Because when I put a house on the market, especially in the 1.3 price range in Glendale, that's a hot price range. I mean, people come out in droves. Right. Yeah, like crazy. The Calendly thing gets booked up like crazy. So I said, and if after that first week, it's crickets and the feedback I'm getting from people, agents calling or whatever, or buyers, whatever, is that they don't know what's going on with this commission thing, then I call you up and we put it back in and I put it in the MLS because back then we could still do that and it's fine. But I would suggest we try this because it has the potential to save you some money.
So I want to
got a question?
Go ahead.
I want to double click on one thing that you said and then I have a question. So I love that what you said out loud into a microphone for the whole world to hear is I have a fiduciary responsibility to my seller. Because that is exactly how you are supposed to approach it as the person who is representing the seller. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for saying that. And I think it's an important message that everyone needs to hear. You have a fiduciary obligation.
I'm not going to say I was scared into it by any means, but we just got our asses handed to us in Kansas City for all sorts of stuff that people were telling us we weren't telling them. And I thought, wait a minute, I have to tell them. It's crazy. So,
And when anyone is unsure, a good rule of thumb is what's in the best interest of my client, right?
Yeah.
And that'll help you project you in the right direction. Now, I'm curious, how concerned were you? So you have the fiduciary conversation with yourself. You're like, yep, I have to talk about it. How concerned were you to talk about it? And on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 going like as easy as humanly possible, and a 1 being it was the worst conversation you've ever had with a seller. So how concerned were you with the conversation? And then how did the conversation go? Because there's going to be some people listening to this who haven't been on a listing presentation yet, and they're freaked the F out, right? And so now you might say, it was terrible, right? But what were you concerned about? And then scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the easiest conversation you had, how did the conversation go?
So first of all, it was a 10, super easy. But I also want to point out there was in the back of my mind, there was another reason I wanted to do this. And it was because it had to be tried. Mm-hmm. Everyone's been, all the videos we were talking about was, wow, if we do it this way, what if we do it? Well, it's never going to work if we try to do it that way. It's never going to this. It was just like, first of all, someone just got to do it. So I was actually, because I knew that it wasn't going to be a problem, I was actually kind of went into it a little bit excited because maybe for personal reasons, but I felt like I was being a trailblazer. I was providing service for my client in a way that nobody else was doing it. And there was something kind of actually exciting about that. And look, just to be clear, I called CAR attorneys, 2 different CAR attorneys, to make sure I got the wording right that I put in the MLS, and I'll go into that in a minute. I mean, I didn't just jump into this totally without doing any research. I did call the CAR attorneys and I said, look, how do I do this? And how do I present it? There's going to be a big fat 0 in the MLS. How do I get the message across in the agent comments without committing my sellers to something that they don't necessarily want to be committed to? So just to wrap that up really quick, they helped me come up with language that actually, James, you mentioned on one of your podcasts a couple of weeks ago. It was a variation on what you said about how moving forward, we can talk about concessions in the MLS as long as we don't talk about it being commission. Well, that's what I did, but I used the word compensation in a way that I'm not going to be able to now, but I could then. I said, look, the sellers have not committed to a specific compensation amount for the buyer's agent. That doesn't mean they aren't willing to pay it. I said, but they are willing to consider compensation.
Sure.
You need to do the following, which is download the thing I put in the multiple listing service that shows you the forms to use, that tells you how to fill it all out, all that stuff. Just follow those steps and my seller will consider paying it. I never committed them to it, but I made sure they understand there was a pathway. So sorry, that was a little tangential.
No, that's actually fine.
It's important.
That's actually good. So you gave a specific path. Our language that we've been saying is sellers willing to entertain any and all requests put in your offer. For all those listeners in North Carolina who keep emailing Keith and I, you can't do it in North Carolina. We understand that, by the way. There's a way to do it. You can do it through concessions. It's a whole separate conversation. But anyways, we've been getting all these stupid emails about like, our state doesn't do it that way. Yeah, we know. You can do it a different way. Point is, you left it open-ended for them to know that there's a path, but that you're not committing to anything. You're just saying you get to put your chips on the table first, and then we'll respond accordingly, basically. Is that fair to say?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So the conversation was, to go back to your first question, was very easy. Mm-hmm. Once I explained it, aside from one seller, he's an older guy, he's old school. I explained it to him, and he's like, no, I'm fine. Just, the historical number that everybody, I'm fine. Let's just put that in. I'm like,
but that's okay. You asked the seller. And the seller chose what they wanted to do. But you did CYA.
Then he called me the next morning and he said, will you explain that to me one more time? I said, yes. He said, yeah, why would I do it the other way? Of course, yes. So and so just as a I can't remember if one of the questions is, what do I think the future holds? The one thing that I just want to say about all the videos and everything that are out there now, and all of these agents who are trying to figure out all of these workarounds and all of this stuff, 7 times, 7 listings I've signed up. And aside from that one instance that I just explained to you, never once has a seller said to me, no, I really want to offer this much right now. All of these agents that are talking about how are we still going to allow for cooperating compensation, sellers aren't going to want to do that. It does not matter. There doesn't need to be a workaround, because once it's properly explained to them, it just doesn't make any sense.
Which, to be clear, so I want to make sure that we're saying the same thing. You're explaining the options to the seller, but in that process, you're also explaining to them to expect to have in the offer or a request come across from the buyer, because the buyer is likely not going to be able to afford representation, that this is going to come across and it's likely going to have to be part of a deal in order to make something come together. And your sellers are going, okay, because they want to do what, Chris? Sell their house.
Yeah. And usually they want to net the most money.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And so we're going to go into
we'll get into that. I have a question that I want to ask real quick, and I want to let Keith ask a question too.
Once I explain the different transactions that I've been through, and I walk them through all of that, and they see that there's been some flexibility in what the sellers have had to pay, they realize, oh yeah, why would I commit to a number now? That makes no sense.
Keith, I'm going to let Keith ask a question first, because I got one I want to ask before we jump forward here. So
okay, so this is January now when this listing hits the market.
Yes.
How did you deal with the buyer's agents?
Yeah, that was my question.
What were they asking?
First call out the gate. First of all, I will say this. All of my local Glendale agents, who I all know very well, I've been in business a long time. My mom's been in the business a long time. They were all, the ones that contacted me were all super cool. They were thanking me for doing it. They were great. One gal bended my ear so many times about it. She brought me a cake. She was great. The 2 negative questions I got, I'll go over the negatives just to get them out of the way, and then I'll talk about everything else. But there were from out of the area, people I'd never heard of, people I didn't know. One gal called, what is this 0% thing? I said, well, the seller's not committing to compensation now, but just put it in the offer and, they'll consider paying it. Did you read what I put in the agent comments? Did you pull down the PDF that I spent a lot of time putting up there so that you guys knew what to do? No, I don't know how to do that. She said, she said some things that made me realize there are still agents, that there are people that look at that number and it means something to them in terms of what they want to show their buyers and stuff like that. And I said, you're just part of the problem. And I got off the phone. I got an email from
Keith and I are personally writing a list that we're going to send of those names to turn into the licensing authorities so that we can actually thin the herd.
Me?
So
there's
are you kidding me?
Yeah. Don't even get us started.
One was an email from a sales manager of an office across town who emailed me, blah, 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 blah. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You're a sales manager. Have you not been paying attention?
Right.
So those were the 2 bad ones. Most of the calls I got were just like, okay, I get it. You're doing this thing. What do I do? And I said, look, this is what you do. Pull down the thing I put in the MLS. It's all very easy. Talk about something that is a big, fat nothing. I mean, it's like so not dramatic. It's so easy. I will say, I don't think in the first couple of transactions, or maybe even any of them, to be honest, whether or not the buyer's agents are signing buyer broker agreements. It is technically required to use the seller payment to buyer's broker form that the buyer and the buyer's agent go under contract, because the numbers have to match. What's on the buyer's broker agreement, buyer representation agreement, has to match the number that goes on the SPBB. Technically, we could have requested those contracts if my seller wanted verification of that. My sellers never did, but I don't think people were signing buyer broker agreements, especially not in the very beginning. Now, moving forward, of course, that's not going to be an issue. I think that was kind of one of the things. So they just needed to know what to do.
To be clear, a comment you just made, you're in California. Remember, we're talking to a national audience, and everybody's doing this differently and stupidly in many cases all over the country. Like I just got off the phone with a lawyer this morning. I don't want to get into it, the stuff I just learned today. You guys have the right to ask.
That's what the podcast was to get into stuff.
Well, let's just say that there's a couple state associations that created a form in such a way that if you are if you're commission sharing based upon the way the form is structured, if the buyer requests a certain amount of money and it's lower than what your seller was going to do, the listing agent keeps the difference versus it going back to the seller. You can't make this shit up, by the way. Literally, there are 6 different states this applies to where they didn't put the language in so that the money would go back to the seller. It stays with the listing agent. So the listing agent basically makes all the difference. I don't want to get into how dumb our industry is right now because I just had a long morning already. But
so ridiculous.
So just to be clear,
some people the buyer should keep it, which is insane to me. So just to be clear, you guys are actually able to, because this is something I just learned. So you're able to request a copy of the buyer rep agreement, and you guys, that's a practice that California is moving towards to verify that the amount of money that they're requesting for matched. Yeah.
Okay. Most people aren't doing that.
Not the whole thing.
The biggest,
just the page related to compensation.
Right.
But yes.
The biggest thing they have to be careful of is that they're not complicit in paying more than what the buyer representation agreement shows. Right. That's the most important issue. Because you can't pay more than whatever their buyer rep agreement.
Based upon the settlement, you cannot.
And I've been thinking about that now, whether moving forward, now that we've made this, now that the changes are in place, whether or not I'm just, as a standard of practice, going to ask for that page or not. The last thing I want is more.
I'm not. We're not your lawyers here, so you'll have to figure that out.
So I'm not asking you guys.
But I will simply state that this is going to be a problem. And it's buyers agents are going to go back. This is the whole thing about why Keith and I keep saying not to advertise an amount up front, because you're telling the buyer and the buyer's agent what to request. Like, it makes no logical sense to me. I mean, some people have lots of arguments based upon market conditions, and I'm not going to disagree with that. But in a general theme, because then if the buyer's agent agreed to X and it was significantly less than what your seller was willing to offer, you just told them, you just left money on the table. But number two is they're going to request an amendment to their buyer rep agreement, which, if anybody read the email or the interview this morning from Michael Ketchmark, I would not be doing that if I were you at all.
To put clarity to that, you mean if someone was offering more, they would amend their buyer rep agreement up, right? You had it at X and you're going to raise it to Y to match whatever was in.
Correct.
And that is you're setting yourself up.
So this goes back to what I was kind of saying before, is if listing agents are appropriately explaining, at least in California, the fact of the way I explain it, the fiduciary obligation, I think explain, you're not going to have sellers pushing back and wanting to offer it. Yeah. So there's all of this, still this conversation around if it's higher than what they're, if what's being offered in the MLS or not in the MLS, but if what a seller is offering is more, it's not, I just don't see it as being an issue. I don't think that that's going to come up anymore if it's appropriately explained to sellers.
Okay. Can I ask
doesn't make sense.
Can I ask a question of both of you? I'll take the other side of this debate just for podcast fun. Okay. So I understand what you're saying if I have a fiduciary obligation to my seller, but if I'm representing the buyer, well, I have a fiduciary obligation to them. And knowing up front what the compensation will be provides clarity to my buyer, and I need that to effectively show properties. The views I'm expressing are simply for conversation purposes. I don't actually agree with what I'm asking, but that's what someone who was taking the other side of this debate would say is, listen, I hear you. Fine. You guys keep talking about fiduciary for the seller all you want. But if I'm repping a buyer, I have a fiduciary obligation to them. And I don't want them to fall in love with a house that they can't buy, or it's better for them to have clarity going in to the conversation. What would you both say?
I'll let Chris start first.
Okay.
I was going to wait for you.
I'm happy to go first, Chris, but you're the guest. If you want to go, you're welcome to. I'm happy to go first. Your call. So.
No, I want you to go first.
Yeah.
I would state that it is irrelevant what the compensation is, because it has no bearing on the fact that what you're all about to hear Chris talk about is the seller wants to sell the damn house. And so a buyer's agent needs to ask their buyer, do you want to write an offer on this house? We do not know if the seller will pay any compensation. I will structure it in the contract so that they do. And if they're not willing to, you and I have to sit down and have a conversation about what it will take to put this deal together. To me, this is not complicated. And I'll go a step further. I don't give a shit if the listing agent says house is sold as is. means nothing to me. My client wants to write an offer on the house. I'm going to write an offer on the house with the couch and the refrigerator because that's what the buyer wants. This is just not complicated. Just sit down and put an offer together on what your buyer needs to get the home, and the listing agent and the seller will respond because they didn't put the house on the market for their health, or maybe they did, but the point's the same. Like, they want to sell the damn house. So Chris, jump in.
That's it. Yes. Look, I totally agree. I think you're right. There's going to, I think it's right now, market conditions are such, at least in my area, where sellers are still doing very well. For the most part, they're getting multiple offers if they're priced right. There's the potential for the buyer agent commission to become a little bit more of a sticky thing when the market turns, for sellers rather, when the market turns, and it becomes a bit more of a buyer's market, they might not be in a position to negotiate it as much, as I'll explain in the situations that I've had where it has been negotiated. It's all market conditions, and these are the conditions we're in right now. Most sellers are reasonable people, I will say. They kind of understand that this is kind of how the process works. But
in a buyer's market, you would agree then, just to be clear, because I want to be sure, but here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying your seller can't do it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm saying you need to do market. But to answer Keith's question, just to be very clear, the buyer's agent just needs to find the house the buyer wants and then negotiate in an offer. The market, I get the market stuff, but it's still irrelevant to the buyer's agent doing their job. Okay. The seller wants to offer a concession, or if the seller wants to advertise because there's 700 houses for sale and there's 25 buyers, and you want to incentivize the buyer to buy that house. And for all the lawyers that are listening to us, in the United States, the seller has a legal right to incentivize people to purchase something. Then they can do that, right? That's where you could say, look, we have a lot of competition. You need to make the choice, but right now there's a lot of homes on the market. If you really need to sell this house, we need to get creative on incentivizing a buyer to write an offer on your home.
Well, and I'm going to add a point to take the other side of my own steel man argument. There is no way on this planet that you could explain to me that not showing a buyer a house is your fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
There's 0% chance of that, especially if you weren't showing it because you weren't sure how you were going to get paid. So you have a fiduciary obligation to the buyer. That is true. That means you should show them everything and then find the structure. Yeah, right. And then structure it as best you can. Might they lose because they're asking the seller for the compensation and another offer isn't? Yes, that was true before all these lawsuits and all this bullshit, right? Your offer went in and competed with all the other offers. There's no way you can convince me, though if you want to buy cocktails, I will listen until you stop paying. But there's no way you could convince me that not showing a property to a buyer is your fiduciary duty.
Yeah. All right. Let's do this because of time's sake, Chris.
Yep.
I want to do two things. Number one is a quick disclaimer. Chris is going to talk about historical figures that have already happened. Neither Chris nor Keith nor James or anybody on this podcast are suggesting anything about compensation or commissions or anything whatsoever. We're going through historical situations that have occurred, which would have been on the MLS for all the lawyers to hear that. So Chris, the meat of this was for you to share the 6 transactions, leaving names out. Okay. But the 6 transactions that are 6 or 7, whatever the number is that you've done recently on the list side, and how it all went down, kind of rapid fire it so that people can hear, this is what we did. Yeah. This is how it worked out. These are the offers. This is what we end up doing, et cetera. So people can get a little bit.
Yeah, what were the real world ramifications?
The real world ramifications. Yeah. Go.
Okay. So before I do that, I'm going to make one really quick so you guys understand how I work as a listing agent.
Okay.
And I would really love it if a lot of other listing agents would adopt this strategy, because I got to tell you, I've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now, and it's great. When I list a house, I do a full battery of inspections. In our area, that's a physical inspection, a termite report, a chimney inspection, a sewer line inspection. I sit down with my sellers before we go on the market, and I do all the disclosures. 90% of the homes I put on the market, I've actually put money up to fix, sometimes $50,000, sometimes $125,000 to get them ready for market. I happen to know a lot about the house at that point. We've got reports that are annotated, repairs that were made, tons of information for buyers to read before they even make an offer. So buyers coming into the process know as much information as they will ever probably know about the house. Of course, yes, other inspectors might find other things, but understand that in a competitive market, that really can help in the offer situation and the contingency situation, all of that. So knowing that that is how I prepare every one of my houses and the information that's available to buyers, I need to set that up so you can kind of understand how when the offers come in, they have certain contingencies or no contingencies,
Got it.
all of that. So
Okay.
first listing comes out in January. This was the first one. What's going to happen? Oh my gosh, is anybody going to come? Crazy. We had 100 families through the house, two of the busiest open houses I'd had in a long time. We got 12 offers on the house in a week, over asking, as you would expect with that number. 3 of the offers were, because we could talk numbers because they're historical, we had a range of, so they all checked the box, they all filled out the form for the most part, a couple of bumps in the road, but everybody basically got it done. All the agents basically got it done that they needed to. So I create a spreadsheet. Each column is an offer, each row is a term. Now there's suddenly a new row on my spreadsheet that says buyer agent compensation and the amount. It ranged from 2% to 3%. There were 2 at 2%, 1 at 2.25%, 7 at 2.5%, and 2 at 3%.
Weird. There's no standard rate.
Yeah. No standard rate.
Shit, I thought there was.
Amazing.
Sorry,
right?
just had to say that.
Crazy, right?
I thought we all colluded.
Yes.
Damn it.
And I was just to be clear,
stopped answering.
different companies. Just want to make sure. Different companies, different.
Different
Okay, just want to make sure I heard that. Okay, keep going. Keep going.
everything.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was the range. It was a 1% range. There were 3 offers that were at the very top, all basically the same price. 2 of them were all cash. One of the all cash, both of those had quick close. One of them had no contingencies at all. They took all of our reports and removed the contingencies. One of the all cashes that had a quicker close kept a 3-day inspection contingency, which we want to change our mind if we can contingency. So I don't really mess around with that. And the other one had a loan, 30-day loan period, escrow period, but no contingencies. So I talked to the sellers and I said, look, we could throw this back out there and grind everybody out one more time, or we could just go maybe back to this one, see if they'll come up a little bit. And, what do you feel about that? They were already getting a lot more money than they were expecting to see. Yeah, let's counter that one offer that's all cash, no contingencies at this number, this price. And if they take it, we're good. So I said, okay, great. Seller interrupted me. That offer had a 2.5% request. Seller stopped me and said, well, but what about this commission thing? I said, oh, you're right. What about this commission thing? He's like, well, do we have to pay them 2.5%? I said, nope. What are you thinking? He's like, well, I see that this other agents down here were willing to do it for 2%. And he said, and this is going to be a quick escrow. You've kind of done all the work for them. They don't really have to do much. It's going to just kind of close in a couple of weeks. And I said, well, okay, hold on. Buyer's agents do a lot of work. We don't know how many homes this person showed them. We don't know how many offers they've written for them. I doubt he picked up the phone the other morning and all of a sudden he's got a house going into escrow. They work hard, just so we're clear. And he said, yeah, but it's going to go really fast. I said, I'm not going to argue. You want to do 2%? Fine. So we negotiated the 2.5% down to 2%. If buyer wasn't happy with that, they could have countered and tried to put it back in because it's just another term in the contract, right? Well, they didn't. Yep. They accepted it. I have no idea if they made up the difference. Not my business. So that was the first one. Second one, 13 offers. Now, this one totally threw me for a loop. Same idea, roughly the same range of commissions, lots of different amounts. 2 of them, however, came in with 0% commission request. One of the offers that was in the middle of the field was an agent shopping for herself. So she was like, I don't need a commission. The highest offer, which was higher by $50,000 than the next closest offer, also had a 0% commission request. It was an agent representing his brother. Well, that offer went from being $50,000 higher than the next offer to almost $100,000 higher than the next offer because it had no commission request at all. So I talked to the seller and I said, well, we can go another round. We're already 150 or so over your asking price. If you want, I'm happy to draw it up, see if we can bleed a little more money out of this guy, but it looks pretty good. And he's like, yeah, no, let's just take it. This is great. So in that case, the seller saved $40,000+ because he didn't have to pay it. pay commission. So that one really shocked me. I hadn't even really thought about the potential of nothing coming in.
Okay.
The third one was a house that sold off market. The third one was the listing agreement I signed up in November, the house that was going to come out in March. In that period, they learned that an acquaintance of theirs was looking for a house just like theirs. So we had set an asking price. They had communicated with these people who wanted to see it ahead of time. I don't really like to do that because I really like, my sellers are going to get the best price if we
on
put it
MLS
out there and get the bidding war and all that. Yes. And, but they liked these people. Their best friends lived 2 doors down. And they were like, okay, let's just show it. And I said, okay, what price are we going to tell them the house is? Because we're not selling it for the listing price. That this is a get a lot of offers price. This is not a sale price. So we talked about it. And they, by the way, those people were represented by an agent. They had an agent that had been working very hard with them for months. And I said, I'm sure they're going to ask you to pay her. So let's figure this in. And they said, well, if they'll pay this number, then we'll sell it to them. So I said, okay, here's the price of the house. Let's take a look at it. They loved it. They bought it. Sellers paid me and they paid the buyer's agent.
Okay.
I want a quick question, right? So we get, like, we've done 3, we could do 3 more. Are there any that are wildly different than the 3 that we've gone over? And then I'm curious.
No. The rest were, the rest were sellers paid what was asked. No more negotiating in the 2 that closed, the last 2 that closed. There's one in escrow. I'm not going to talk about the numbers, but an interesting thing happened. It was a house that was on the market. The didn't get multiple offers. Got one offer, fortunately, but it was quite a bit under asking, about $100,000 under asking, with a specific commission number requested. Yes. And my sellers immediately said first of all, before we even talked about what price we were going to counter them at, they said, we don't want to pay that much. We're willing to pay this much. And they reduced it a little bit. And then we basically split the difference on the price, issued that counter offer. So it was slightly higher price, slightly lower commission amount. Agent calls me. He says, look, everything's great. We're good. But the buyer is having a mental block about paying over a certain number for the house. And the amount of the commission was basically the amount that of the price that we were countering at. Essentially, if we had taken out the commission, it would have been a lower. So basically, the agent said, so we're gonna take out buyer agent compensation and just reduce the price to this number that the buyer feels comfortable with, and he and I will figure out my compensation on our own. But it's the same net to the seller at the end of the day. So lower price, sale price, same net to the seller. I mean,
do you know how many times, Chris, Keith
fine.
and I have said this like till we're blue in the face about this? It's if you want the seller to pay it, throw the higher price in. Like, and it's just a negotiation on it. And so I know Keith's got a question. I'm just basically what I'm hearing is that. Now, I know probably viewers will be like, well, the price point's $1 million. Okay, the psychology is the same in that sellers want to sell their house. So am I wrong on that? Like, am I being, like, in your experience having done this now 6 or 7 times, would you ever have anybody that goes like, hell no, screw realtors, I'm not going to pay them shit? Like, has that happened? No?
No, I mean, look, they try to be funny about it.
Yeah.
They'll make a joke about it, but no,
because really they care about their net.
They
don't.
Then they get it. I mean, they get that it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. And I always have explained it to them just really quickly. Look, buyers are tapped. Right. They're tapped in Southern California. They don't have more money to be thrown
tapped everywhere.
Let them wrap
They're
it
pretty
into their
tapped
mortgage,
everywhere. So how did the buyer's agents feel about this process that you took them through? What was it? Yeah.
So, I mean, they were trepidatious. They were the ones that were actually making offers. I got a lot of crap from people that weren't even offering on anything. They just wanted to be obnoxious. They didn't have buyers interested. They just wanted to tell me that they thought I was a jerk. But the ones that ultimately went through it, we didn't honestly have a lot of. When I say it was a big nothing, it was a big nothing. Wasn't a whole lot of conversation about it afterwards. I will say, to the credit of a couple of brokers in Glendale, the brokers of the Keller Williams office and a broker of in a smaller little independent office, actually in January after the first one, invited me to come and speak at their office and talk about why,
good for them,
and how it happened, and what we were doing.
Yeah.
That was pretty great. Very welcoming. And we all talked about it. It was a big group discussion. I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be in a big office. I've never been in a big office. This is interesting. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of okay on my own. But no, to your question, there really was not a lot of discussion. Honestly, it was really nuts and bolts. No one tried to fight me on it. The ones that were actually making offers, obviously, they weren't going to try to piss me off, I guess, because they were offering on my listings. But they were fine once I explained it to them. Really, honestly, once it's explained. And I'll be honest with you guys, this is why I'm just really appreciative that you gave me the opportunity to do this. Yeah. I've left comments on a couple of other YouTubers' videos, like detailed comments, and explaining that I've done this, hoping that they would invite me to come and talk about it. I have zero reach on YouTube. I make these amazing property tours if people would like to watch them, but I don't do what you guys do. I could have made this video and it would have just sat there and no one would have seen it. And I tried and it was boring. This is a way better way to do it, engaged like this. So I just wanted people to know that it's just not a big deal. And that was what I think all the other agents gleaned from the experience, was that, oh, it's just an extra piece of paper we have to do. Yes, it's a conversation I have to have with my buyers now. A conversation we probably should have been having all along anyway. But at the end of the day, it's just really easy. And it will become easier.
All right.
Listing appointment you go on.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming on the show, by the way. Yeah. We're glad we gave you a platform to talk about it. We think it's important for everybody to hear all conversations. Mm-hmm. We're not shy about having guests on the show. We have some pretty controversial ones coming on, which we're either going to get canceled for or not. I'm not sure yet, but we'll find out. I'm gonna ask. Keith's going to wrap us up with a final question on this, but I just want to make sure. Can I just summarize real quick, and you can tell me if I got it right from listening to this whole show? It starts with the listing agent having the right conversation with their seller. This is what we can do. These are your options. This is what you need to understand about the market. You're making a lot of money on your house. Real estate's expensive. There's a reason why both potential presidents are talking about it in their pitches. You need to be prepared for this to be included in an offer. You can decide what you want to do. At the end of the day, it's going to be about a negotiation to sell your house. Did I get that summarized fairly accurately? Okay. And then on the buy side, when agents call you, it's like, my seller's not saying they won't. We're just saying submit your best offer. Again, I'm going to repeat it 60,000 times. My seller isn't saying they won't. They're just saying submit your best offer. We'll respond accordingly. My seller's interested in selling their house. Let's put a deal together. Does that summarize like the conversation for the most part? Okay.
100%. It's just another term.
Right. Keith, take us home.
All right. What should people in the industry be doing, whether they operate a brokerage or they're an individual agent, to prepare their business for the next evolution in this new normal that we are in?
Well, first of all, get rid of any fear. It's nothing to be afraid of. Be prepared with practice the conversation, I guess, a couple times. Maybe this is more to brokers and managers. Just make sure they understand the points. It's a very easy conversation to have. Honestly, it's not that hard. And just don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Really just embrace it. It's such a logical thing. It makes perfect sense. The only reason I didn't adopt this before is because actually I'm not that bright. I would never have come up with this on my own, honestly. I would never have thought to think that far outside the box. I really wouldn't have. The $1 thing that we always could have, sure, we could have been doing this all along. But the time has come and the sky is not going to fall. And
Chris, can we put your information in the show notes if somebody wants to reach out to you and ask questions? Are you okay?
Of course.
We would love to do that. So,
appreciate it. Yeah.
Chris, thanks for coming on the show, my friend. Genuinely, for sharing everything on your vacation in Sicily. Please enjoy it, and also keep leading, because I love the fact that you're trying new things and you're constantly putting your seller at the forefront of that conversation. So we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Good. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. Ciao.
Ciao.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.